Good morning and welcome to the RIAC Learning Series. My name is Vanessa Brewer and I am the Regional Interagency Council Program Administrator, and my co-host is Lee Taylor. Lee is the State Interagency Council Program Administrator, and we work at the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities. Our presentation today is titled Using Data to Inform RIAC Action Planning, Focused Conversation Method. And we've got Dr. Tina Robbins with us today. She's the Senior Executive Advisor and Innovation and Implementation Support with the Department for Behavioral Health, Developmental, and Intellectual Disabilities. And before I turn it over to Dr. Robbins, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. If you haven't already, please mute your mics. However, feel free to either raise your hand during the session or put something in the chat or unmute if you have a question about what's being covered. Also, this workshop will be recorded and posted on the RIAC's YouTube channel. And so we'll put that link in the chat box in just a little bit. Also, just as I mentioned earlier, you may use the chat box if you prefer for questions and or comments. Lee and I will be monitoring it during the session. A session evaluation link will be posted in the chat box towards the end of the session, so please take a moment to complete it at that time. And as always, certificates of attendance are available upon request, and you can email me if you are interested in having one of those, and I'll put my email in the chat box. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Robbins.
All right. Thank you so much, Vanessa and Lee, and welcome everybody. It is so nice to be back with you. I know per my conversation I was just having with Vanessa that we have some new RIAC members and some new RIAC chairs and probably some new LRCs, I would think. And so all of you may not have been able to view or join us for the previous session that I did on utilizing data, but I am going to be making some references back to that that previous presentation. So at some point, I hope you'll go back and review that one as well, because they do build on each other. But I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. So today we're going to. I'm hoping to convey to you a methodology that meeting facilitators often use. It's been used nationally, called the focused conversation method, and it's a way to move groups toward action. And so what we hope to accomplish today is to give you a new tool for your toolbox. And I know not all of you facilitate the RIAC, but you don't necessarily have to be the facilitator of the RIAC to be able to take advantage of this focused conversation methodology. And you're certainly a participant, even if you're not the facilitator or the leader of that or the chair of that group. The other thing I'll mention is that the focused conversation method, you can use it in your personal life. And it's a very simple, natural way of having a dialogue. So we'll get into a lot more detail, but first I want to, if you'll go to the next slide, I would like for us to do a little bit of a warm-up activity. And again, as I mentioned, today's session is about having focused conversations within your RIACs to move members toward shared understanding of actions. And so I'd like for you to take a few moments to reflect on a recent conversation that you've had with an individual or a group that you found to be particularly productive, whether that productivity is, something that you found to be beneficial, relevant, fulfilling. So let me just give you a few minutes to jot down just a few things to help you remember that conversation. And again, it doesn't have to have been in a RIAC meeting or even in a work-related meeting. It could have been with your colleague. It could have been with your spouse. It could have been with your significant other. Okay, does everybody give me a thumbs up if you have a conversation that you're thinking about right now, that you've identified one? All right, very good. All right. So if I were in the situation you are reflecting upon, what would I see going on? What words would I hear? What expressions would I see on people's faces? So you don't have to answer all those questions, but just think about how you would convey that. So I'm not going to pick on people individually, but I'll just ask somebody to share what's a single word that I might have heard in your conversation that was really important in that conversation. If somebody doesn't mind just popcorning that out.
Productive. Excuse me.
Productive.
Productive.
Okay. Gotcha. Thank you. Motivated, I see.
Understanding.
Understanding, learning. Great. Okay. So those are all objective observations, and we're going to talk more about this, but just those are all objective sort of observations that were made about that conversation. The next question, what was the best part of the conversation? If somebody doesn't mind just thinking about that for a minute and then sharing what the best part of that productive conversation was.
Making a plan.
Making a plan. What was your mood at the end of that discussion or that conversation?
Excitement, motivated.
Motivated and excited. Awesome. Kelly Dorman says upbeat. Awesome. I want to be in a meeting like that, right? Collaboration and ownership. So those were some of your feelings there. All right. And so that is an example of a reflective question. So you're reflecting on that conversation. So the next question is it's still thinking about that same productive conversation. What kinds of actions or behaviors happened during that conversation that made it productive, and why?
There was a specific task that we were trying to accomplish.
Okay. So being pretty focused in terms of what the specificity of that conversation was. Okay, gotcha. Brainstorming, okay. Great.
I think one of the best things was mine was a subcommittee on a thing that we were trying to put together, and we got everybody's ideas. I think ownership would be probably where that's at, and we got it finished. So
yeah, awesome. So the action or the behavior there was people taking ownership and agreeing to follow through and do some things. Did I get that right, Donnie? Awesome. All right. And so that kind of thinking there that you all just did about that conversation is more interpretive. You had to do some synthesis to really think through the conversation and think about what made it productive. And then finally, the final question I want to pose to you is, from what you have considered about this productive conversation, what's one action that you could take to contribute to more productive conversations in the future? So think about that for a minute, and then if somebody doesn't mind sharing.
I think when we talk about the subcommittee and the success we had at our RIAC, more people are more likely to get involved or want to get involved to participate in the subcommittee.
So celebrating is an action you could take. Celebrating and acknowledging accomplishments. Beautiful. Yeah. Beautiful. And so, so thank you all for reflecting on your experiences of what has in the past made for an effective conversation. And you have just experienced a focused conversation. What I walked you through was that process of doing that. Now, had we been focused, as Monica said, on or somebody, I think it was, on a specific activity, at the end of this, we would have generated an entire list of actions that folks could adopt and adapt, that would have led to more productive conversations in the future. So I just wanted to kind of get you thinking about, and we're going to go into a lot more detail about this, but I just wanted to sort of get you thinking about conversations, but also to get you your first sort of little toe in the water on what a systematic process for thinking about and having a conversation can look like. So Lee, Lee, next slide. I think it's you. So as a little bit of a refresher, I mentioned to you that that I did a presentation with another group a while back on having data-focused conversations. And I gave you some strategies and some templates to follow for ways to look at data and to keep your conversations in your RIACs focused on data. And so I just want to do a little bit of a refresher on the rationale for why being a data-driven RIAC is important. And so in what way is data an integral part of the system of care work and the work of the RIACs? And you'll recall that one of the system of care guiding principles is that it is a system that supports provider accountability and quality improvement tracking. And so data and information is clearly an important component of being able to keep the system accountable and to ensure that you're monitoring the quality. And so again, data and information is key to the effectiveness of our system. I also wanted to remind you that there are a few RIAC member responsibilities, and I know Vanessa has gone over these with you probably numerous times, but there are a few RIAC member responsibilities that for which data are an important part of them. And one of those is actively participating in developing solutions to identified system level barriers for children and transition age youth. And so that is one of your duties or responsibilities. And so clearly within that particular function, identifying system level barriers is something that requires you to have data and information. Certainly developing evidence-based solutions also requires data and information. Another of your responsibilities is to provide local agency data to assess and support identified gaps and needs. And so there again, data is obviously integral. It is the product that you are expected to share and to bring to your RIAC meetings. And then you're also to support the work of the RIAC and actively participate by using data from your agency to address gaps and needs and to promote data-driven decision-making. And so again, data and the use of data is all through your responsibilities there. It's also very, very evident in the primary RIAC functions, conducting regional system of care planning and operations, doing system level CQI activities, identifying expansion opportunities, being outcome-based, using evidence-based practices, all through the descriptions of the RIAC functions. There is a call to and a charge to look at data. So that's why Vanessa, in her brilliance, next slide, has ensured that we are scaffolding your learning and action as RIACs by ensuring that you have lots of different opportunities to learn about data and how to use data, how to integrate data, how to act upon it. And so I just want to remind you of what you've had so far. And there are many, many other examples, but these are the most prominent sessions I believe that you've had so far that specifically look toward increasing your capacity and competency in using data. And so we know that new learning is constructed on prior knowledge. And so, as I said, Vanessa, as she's thinking through these learning events, and I'm sure you all are having input into them as well, there's intentional scaffolding that's happening where we're building on your knowledge. And so in January of 21, and I think, Vanessa, I saw that you put the link to that previous session in the chat box, but it's also here in these slides. That's a hyperlink. But there's a segment within this the January 21 learning series where I talked about a 5-step process for data-driven conversations and action planning. And I gave you lots and lots of tools and templates and things like that to draw upon for using that 5-step process. And then you had an opportunity to hear from Ian Shepherd with the AOC about using data to develop and support the action plan. So again, building on that previous knowledge and continuing to move you toward being more data-driven. And today, we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into a particular method that you all just experienced a little bit of, for how to use data to inform RIAC action planning. So how do you have a focused conversation about data that your RIAC has just reviewed together? And we're going to do some examples of that at the end. And I'm going to be conveying to you today how you as facilitators and members can participate in a very intentional conversational method to talk about data and other kinds of information. So next slide. So the focused conversation method is what we're going to be looking at today, and we could go on to the next slide. And I just want to review really quickly the session purpose and what I hope you all will be able to walk away from today from this session as a learning objective. And so today, I hope that you will learn to leverage inquiry techniques to facilitate conversations so that you can get impactful results. And we're going to use Kentucky Kids Count data as an example. And so hopefully by the end of this, if I've done a decent job with this, you're going to be able to at least to some very basic level, be able to explain the focused conversation model or method. I would hope that you would be able to identify and define the 4 levels of inquiry or questioning, if you will. Inquiry and questioning, you can use those interchangeably. So I'd be able to identify and define the 4 levels of questioning, giving an example question for each level and we're going to talk in great more detail about those different levels. I had planned to have you examine your most recent kids count data for your region and generate actionable strategies. But what I decided was probably, because I wrote these objectives a long time ago, but what I decided was probably more helpful is for us to walk through how to develop a conversational guide so that you as a facilitator or as a member would be familiar with how to do that. And so I think that's a little more important because then you can go back and apply that with your RIAC and use your specific county level data and be able to have this kind of a conversation about that data. So I tweaked it just a little bit. I hope, Vanessa, you don't go screaming and say, oh my gosh, that's not what you were supposed to do. But as I was processing through this, I felt like that was a bit of a better approach to take. So we can move to the next slide. So I don't know how many of you have read any of Peter Senge's work. The 5th discipline, I think, is the one that he's the most known for. But give me a thumbs up if you have read any of his work on leadership, on change, on any of his work at all. Do we have anybody? So he's, I can't see everybody, so I'm not sure if I see any thumbs up or not. I was hoping somebody would say, yeah. So this quote, it's pretty verbose, but I think it's an important sort of, there's an important message in here, and I'm just going to read it out loud for you so that you can reflect as I'm reading. So he says, and this is from A New View of Institutional Leadership, from a piece that he did called Reflection on Leadership. And it says, once a society loses this capacity for dialogue, all that is left is a cacophony of voices battling it out to see who wins and loses. There is no capacity to go deeper, to find a deeper meaning that transcends individual views and self-interest. I think it's supposed to be meaning there. Sorry about that typo. It seems reasonable to ask whether many of our deeper problems in governing ourselves today, the so-called gridlock and loss of mutual respect and caring, might not stem from this lost capacity to talk with one another, to think together as part of a larger community. And so I think as we reflect on these words, we recognize that some of our greatest societal failures could be mitigated or even prevented if we engaged in participatory and inclusive kinds of conversations. And I'm thinking, Donnie, about what you said about your subcommittee meeting that you had recently, and how it feels like that you were able to get beyond personal interests there and have people really coming together in a collective kind of way to tackle a societal issue. And I bet if I ask you, you would say that that talking about that issue together was probably what led to the solution. And so being able to have an inclusive and participatory conversation about some kind of data or information related to a problem is so critical. And it's critical for you all as RIACs to be able to have a way to do that. And so again, if we can go to the next slide, Lee, that's why I wanted to be able to share with you this 4-step process, so related to focused conversations. And this is the book. It's actually an older book from 2000, but it has pretty much stood the test of time, and this methodology is utilized all over the world, really. And this is just a simple definition that it's a 4-stage process to move a group through a phased reflection to process information or data, if you will. Data and information can be used interchangeably in an orderly manner and arrive at a shared understanding of actions. And so remember, what I really wanted for you all to be able to walk away with is some kind of a strategy or method for moving your RIACs to action. And I was thinking about some conversations that I have from time to time, work related and personal. And, sometimes the conversation feels incredibly unproductive, incredibly fragmented. Sometimes they feel like they're not participatory. Sometimes they feel like it's being dominated by one person, and no one else really has a voice in the conversation. And so I don't know how many of you experience conversations like that from time to time. But I do truly believe that we have to be very intentional, especially when we're in groups of people, to plan out our conversations. And again, and to think very strategically about the way the brain works and about how we need to structure conversations with very pointed questions to be able to move a group away from those fragmented, non-participatory kinds of conversations to things that are more productive, like we described earlier, where you felt energized and motivated and understood, and all of those words that you all said you felt when you reflected upon a personal, a conversation that you had had recently. And so the focus conversation methodology is a very, very simple process led by a facilitator or a RIAC chair or a RIAC member, perhaps, who asks a series of questions about a topic. And it goes through a phased process. It begins with things that can be observed, like facts or data, and gets all voices in the room to share simple observations. And so remember, when we were doing that warm-up exercise, I just had you start by sharing some observations that you made about your conversations. It calls forth information tied to individual experiences to enrich the data to be considered. And then the group reflects on that, and you bring forth some meaning, and you consider options and possibilities and questions and other kinds of things. And then in that final stage, you decide what actions you're going to take as an individual or as a group. And so that's how that flow sort of happens. And we're going to go through the stages in a little bit more detail later on. I do want to mention where this work comes from. It's a method, a facilitation method that was developed by the Institute of Cultural Affairs as part of its, there's a technology of participation network, and that they developed it as part of that. Now, I'm referring to it as the focused conversation method, but it goes by some other names too. It's been called the art form method because it's kind of the art of conversation. It's been called a discussion method, a basic conversation method, a guided conversation method, and sometimes it gets referred to as ORID, which stands for each of the letters that I'll show you in a few minutes in the 4-stage process. And so you may hear it go by different names, but I'm going to be referring to it as the focused conversation methodology today. So next slide. So let's talk a little bit about the benefits of having a focused conversation and using the focused conversation methodology. So it is an excellent way to provide structure to conversations that might otherwise travel all over the map. I'm sure none of you have been in those kinds of conversations, and definitely not in your RIACs where you are just freaking all over the place in the conversation. We never do that at our office, but it does provide a very structured way to have a conversation, which saves you time and energy. It can also minimize potential hidden agendas and minimizes any power plays or things like that may be happening. So again, having a very structured way to have a conversation is incredibly helpful in terms of efficiencies around time and energy. It's also versatile. You can use it with a group of people that have worked together for many years. You can use it with a group of strangers. So it's versatile in that regard. It can be adapted easily. You can have it with, you can do this process with small groups or with larger groups. I don't know how effective it would be with an incredibly seminar room full of people, just because it is more of supposed to be more of a conversation. But it does have some versatility in terms of, the familiarity of the people in the room and how well it would work for them. I also want to mention this because I know we talk a whole lot about equity and inclusion and a sense of belonging, and we've become much more aware as of late about the importance of those things, thankfully. And so because the focused conversation applies an inclusive structure to the listening process, it also promotes a shared kind of understanding. And so the process is very intentional in seeking full participation from everybody and making space for lots of different experiences in the room to be considered. And so it's inclusive in that respect. Now, again, you have to be very purposeful as the leader or the facilitator of the conversation to make sure that that inclusivity is happening. But I did want to mention that because I know we as RIAC entities, as RIAC collaborations, want to be as inclusive as possible. And then finally, another benefit of having this, using this focused conversation method, is that it accelerates impact and can lead to improved outcomes. And so, sometimes people look at data alone and start to kind of unpack that data and what it means in isolation. But if we can do that collectively and get all those different perspectives in there and be inclusive in the perspectives that come to the table, we will benefit from those conversations and from looking at that data and having a data conversation in this kind of a way. And it will ultimately accelerate the impact and lead to improved outcomes, I believe, more efficiently and more effectively than if we're just looking at data in isolation and having fragmented conversations and jumping right to, or trying to jump right to, the action steps without really processing through what the information and data mean to the people that are going to be impacted by it. So we can go to the next slide there. Thank you. Now, there are also some limitations to this method that I wanted to make sure we talk about before we jump into what this method looks like. So you may not always get consensus when you're using this particular method. I know it sometimes can be contentious in meetings, and I'm sure that's true with RIAC meetings, where people don't necessarily agree on what the issue at hand is, or they don't necessarily agree on what actions should be taken, or what the implications of this particular data point might mean, or this information that you've just gotten about a new regulation in child welfare or something. There may not always be consensus about those things. So just know that a focused conversation methodology may not necessarily lead you to group consensus. People can only tolerate this kind of intense conversation for about 45 minutes, according to the developers. And so I know my attention span for conversations, particularly since I'm an introvert, is probably way less than 45 minutes. But just know that these conversations are meant to be briefer and quicker in their duration. It's primarily a verbal method. So think about that, because not everybody learns in a verbal kind of way. And so you may need to incorporate visuals or make it more kinesthetic to promote engagement, but it is primarily a conversational method. And so it relies a lot on verbal exchanges, which, again, it doesn't work well for everybody that you may have in the room. And then it does require people to pay attention because it's a conversation. And so, it's not as easy when you're using the focused conversation methodology to just tune out or, do something completely different, because you do have to pay attention, and you do, as a group, need to track the comments that are made, because you're processing information in a systematic way. So there definitely are some limitations, to be sure. Next slide. So there are lots and lots of ways, lots and lots of types of conversations that this methodology can be applied to. And I have, I mentioned, and I'm going to share with you later, and we're going to do something together that falls in the realm of evaluating and reviewing, because we're going to evaluate, or if you will, review the kids count, some of the kids count data, the statewide trends basically, and we're going to do that together. But you can use this methodology to evaluate and review things like reviewing a major report, evaluating a workshop or a seminar. You can apply this methodology to that. You can apply it to conversations around preparation and planning. So if you are, let's say the RIAC is selecting a topic for an upcoming conference, you could apply this methodology to help you come up with the topics for your conference or for your event that you're having. You can use it for coaching and mentoring. So I know we probably have some folks here that supervise, that coach folks, students or young people or whatever, or you may be a mentor to someone. You can use this structured method for those kinds of conversations. There are lots and lots of examples in the book that I have the book here. I don't know if you can see it, but the book that I showed you, The Art of Focused Conversation, there are 100 examples, literally 100 examples in that book of how to structure conversations for these different purposes, for interpreting information. You could use it to discuss the impact of a new regulation. You could have somebody present on a new regulation and then have a structured conversation about it. For decision-making, when you as a RIAC are making some decisions about a new policy, whether you're going to implement a new policy as a RIAC or a new procedure or something, you can have a discussion and present that and then have a focused conversation about that and make some decisions. You can also use it for managing and supervising, building a timeline for a project. That's an example, and there are examples again in the book about how to structure a conversation for that purpose. And then you can use it to celebrate. You know, we were talking earlier about celebrating a victory, planning for personal growth, talking to someone about their retirement plans. So you can even use it at a very personal level in that way. So it's very versatile in its applicability. So let's do a little reflection and have a little more interaction. So if we can go to the next slide. So so I'd like for you to look at this question about the types of conversations your RIAC engages in. Are these conversations typically structured? Are they versatile? You know, could complete strangers come in and be a part of your conversations as a RIAC? Are they inclusive? Are they impactful and outcome-oriented kinds of conversations? And so I'm not going to ask you to necessarily share unless you feel so obliged to do so. But if you answered no to any of these, then I really encourage you to try the focused conversation method at an upcoming meeting or at another situation, personal or professional, and see what you think about it. And we're going to do a little bit of that later today, but I'm just curious if folks feel like the conversations that they have at their RIACs are fairly structured, versatile, inclusive, and impactful, and if somebody would kind of be willing to share their thoughts on that.
I think we have all of those in RIAC at some point, maybe not in the same meeting, but we have all of those.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about how your conversations that you have sort of are structured? I mean, is the structuring of the conversations intentional in any way? do you have set questions maybe that you ask to kind of prompt your group to be thinking about something?
Occasionally we do,
Yeah.
yeah, but sometimes, I just gotta say, hey, turn your video on, get off your cell phone and, Facebooking, and let's get down to the bolts and nuts here and let's get this
Mhm.
resolved.
Yeah,
I mean, rarely do I have to do that, but the facilitator, sometimes we have to.
yes, you do.
So,
Yes, you do. Yeah.
but
So,
it's,
yep.
I think we have all of those, and probably some others, just
Yeah.
to be honest with you, at
Yeah.
some point.
Yeah. Thank you. And I saw Michelle put in the chat, I think it was Michelle, it popped up and then it left. Trying to, stick with the agenda to maintain structure in the conversation so that you don't get too far afield in that type of thing. So I appreciate you all contributing to that. And so I do hope you'll try this methodology for a particular conversation. Again, if there's a particular issue or topic, decision that you need to make, or something you all are reviewing, or something you're planning, remember those different ways in which a conversation could be useful. I hope that you'll try this method out that we're going to dig into in a little bit deeper now. And then, try it out and see what you think. See if you think it moves you to action in a little bit of a quicker way. And it may be kind of clumsy at first, like any new thing you're implementing. It may feel a little bit clumsy at first, but I'm going to give you some tips along the way to kind of help with that. So if we can move to the next slide, we've got a graphic here that shows the four types of inquiry, or the four sort of stages of questioning that you would move through. And it goes, so just remember ORID, O-R-I-D. And I read something recently where they had a cute little thing that said it's horrid without ORID, so that you could remember the sequencing. So it's, so this is the process. It moves from objective to reflective to interpretive to decisional. And so when we process information, we basically, whether we realize it or not, we go through these different phases. And, the focused conversation is based on the way that we process information. And I'm going to show you the neurological underpinnings of it in just a minute. But just at a real sort of quick level, I'm going to go through the four types of questions that you would ask and the order in which you would ask them. And so you would apply this to set up the conversation. And we're going to do some examples later, but you would sort of set the stage and say, we're going to have a conversation about whatever it is, and you would present them with whatever information they needed to react to, and then you would proceed to ask the questions. But the way you ask the questions is very important, and the manner in which you frame them and the sequencing of the questions is very important in a focused conversation, because again, you're trying to move people from objective to decisional, right? From data and information that they're getting to action. And there are consequences if you don't move them systematically through this process. And we'll talk about what happens when you skip a stage or skip a process or skip a type of question along the way. Because I have been in many, many meetings where somebody says, here's the issue, and somebody in the group immediately jumps to action. Here's what we need to do about that, right? Without processing through. I'm sure that never happens in your all's meetings. But sometimes I'm that person, like I'm ready to take action on something. And I think I know what the answer absolutely needs to be. And I just immediately go from I don't even talk about the objective part. I just immediately jump to, here's the action that I think we need to take. And so Donnie races, he does that too. So this might be, as it is sometimes hard for me, this might be a little hard for people like us, Donnie Ray, who want to jump right to the action step, but you can actually move through this process pretty quickly. Depending on, your members and your facilitation skills, but you can move groups through it pretty quickly. So at the objective level, again, the questions would be questions about facts and external reality. So, I just shared a report with you. What were the facts and that were apparent to you in that report? I haven't yet asked you how you felt about them or what they mean. I'm just asking you to tell me about the facts. What did you hear me say in that when I gave you the results of that report, or when I did a presentation? What did you hear, in terms of facts and reality? So that's the objective part. Then you would move to the reflective level. And these questions are asking people to share their personal reaction to the data or to the information. So it's more of the internal, right? So you just did that external reality, like what is the facts? What are the facts? And then you move to the internal. So how did that make you feel? What emotions, what emotional response did you have? What feeling did you have when I shared that fact with you? What were some of the images or visual images that came to your mind when I shared this particular fact with you? So you move from objective to more personal, internal, reflective. So that's called the reflective level. And there are so many different ways you can pose questions to get to that with people, depending on the topic or the issue that you're conversing about. Then you move to the interpretive level. Now, this is where that synthesis has to happen. You have to do a little more processing, a little more thinking about the issue at hand. And so you ask your group questions that are going to draw out what they see as the meaning behind what's going on here. You'll get at values, you'll get at significance, you'll get at insights, you'll get at what they learned from what you just shared with them, and you'll get at the implications. And I tend to do a lot of interpretive. I know this about myself, the more that I've learned about this method. I tend to be the person who asks a lot of the interpretive questions. Like, I don't know how many of you know Dr. Alan Brenzel, but Dr. Brenzel is brilliant, and he will be talking about something, and he'll give me some of the facts and whatever he's talking about, and then I'll have reflect on, wow, that really makes me angry that happens that way, or that is a regulatory barrier that gets in the way or whatever. But inevitably, I'll say to him, what are the implications of this for the people we serve, right? I tend to be that person who asks about the implications. And so that's the interpretive level question that you're posing to people. And in that thinking, they have to really do a lot. It gets more complex, right? You can see how it's much more complex in terms of just spitting back a fact that you heard somebody say and reflecting on how you feel about it, and then moving to a more of an interpretive level where you have to think about, okay, well, what are the implications of that? And then you move to questions that help your group make a decision and take action, which is where Donnie and I like to be, I think. And so at the decisional level, the questions elicit possible resolutions. You're starting to bring the conversation to a close. You're starting to get the group to, come to some kind of resolve about the future steps that are going to need to be taken. And so essentially you are moving your group that you're having the conversation with very systematically from objective to reflective to interpretive and ultimately to action and decisions. Okay, so I know this feels a little probably abstract right now, but we're going to do some examples that I hope will help you. But this 4-stage process is a total process. It uses all of your body's resources, right, to come to terms with whatever it is you're talking about. It uses the left brain and the right brain. You have to use some intuition and some reasoning. And it basically uses questions to get at, the real objective and concrete dimensions of a situation, the emotional responses, how people are interpreting it or synthesizing it, and finally, as I said, decisions about actions. And so, so that's kind of the four stages in the process. So on the next slide, this is, again, we refer to it sometimes as ORID because it's the objective, reflective, interpretive, decisional. This is the neurology part of it. This is how the brain is working in the background. And the focused conversation follows this neurological journey. And by using ORID, it helps you to structure the questions in a sequence that aligns with the way your neurology works. And so here's just a little, and I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but I just wanted you all to understand that there is a neurological basis for asking the questions in this way. So at the objective level, where we're talking about the data, giving people data and information, we're taking the information in through our senses. Visually, you might share, you might have graphs. People are going to, hear auditorily, maybe perhaps a presentation. They might be reading the information or the data. So lots of ways, but it's a full, kind of body sensory experience. And then in the second step, where we talked about the reflective level, we have an experience, an emotional experience. We develop some associations between what we just read and other kinds of experiences that we've had. And then at the third level, we're trying to sort of make sense of what we're hearing and what we're seeing and what we're feeling. You're trying to bring all of that together to make sense of it. And so that's where the meaning making comes. Like, what does this mean for us? What does this really mean that, we have truancy rates at what they are in whatever county, ABC county that you're in. What does that data really mean that the truancy rates are different by race? Like, what does that really mean? And we try to begin to start making meaning out of that. And then at the decisional level, we make a decision based on all of that information and we take action. And so that's the neurological sort of journey that this ORID or focused conversation methodology is based upon. So on the next slide, it's just a little bit more about the type of questions. And I've already said that a little bit, but this is this is how I first learned about this, was because I was with somebody who was facilitating a meeting, and she utilized this other way of thinking about the processing, the questioning process. She used a what ? Gut ? So what and now what sequence. And I really kind of like that too. So if the ORID doesn't really work for you, you can also use the what, gut, so what, now what method to help remember how to ask the questions. And so these are all similar. But a focused conversation, it not only mirrors the way the brain functions, as I said, that neurological journey, but it helps the group to take a journey together, right? Gives the group an opportunity to take in, some data and information, and on the at the end to be able to have some kind of shared awareness about what it all means and what kind of action we can take on that information. And so at the objective level, or the what question mark, after you've presented information to your group, you're going to ask them questions, as I said earlier, that engages the senses. You're going to invite participation. And at this stage, you basically ask everybody in your group. So this means calling people out at, sometimes to actually engage in some way, either in, if you're doing it by Zoom, in the chat, or if you're in a room, asking them kind of in a round robin kind of way to give a sensory reaction, an objective reaction to what it is that you've been sharing with them. And you're inviting participation. So you're putting the facts out on the table, the objective information that was just shared, to make sure that everybody is sort of on the same page about what they just heard in terms of, the data and the information. So did everybody hear that truancy rates are increasing and that they're disparate for Black and brown youth compared to others? Did everybody sort of get that same sort of factual information from the report or from the presentation that was done? And then at the gut level, remember I said that's that emotional level. You're going to ask questions as a facilitator that elicits intuitive associations or initial perceptions or emotional responses. And you're going to acknowledge those emotions and those associations. And so, when Jacqueline hears that that truancy rates are increasing and that there are racial disparities in the way in which those truancy rates are increasing, she may have an incredibly different emotional response than somebody else, than Vanessa would. And it's important that you get all of those emotional associations and reactions sort of out on the table and acknowledge those and respond to those, so that neurologically and as an individual, people can move to that interpretive level, which is the stage at which you're saying, so what? So what does all this really mean? Right? That's the meaning making part. And that's what they call the interpretive level again. So at this point, when you move, you've asked about the facts, the what, you've got at the gut reaction to the what, and now you're getting at the so what. So what does this mean? You're going to, as facilitators, you're going to ask questions to help share and build meaning. So you're trying to build a collective understanding and awareness there and identify some options and possibilities. Okay. So you're doing a lot of meaning making there. And then ultimately you'll get to the now what. So what do we do with this? We've talked about what the facts are. We've gotten people's gut reactions, their emotional responses to it. We've talked about what it really means, the so what. And now we're to the now what. So at this stage, this is where the action happens. And at this decisional stage, you're going to ask questions that draw out even deeper meaning and develop some shared agreement. And then you will move the group toward making some decisions about actions that they're going to take. And that can look a lot of different ways. But for you all as RIACs, that's probably a good time to put something on your action plan, right? So let's just, think about that. Let's say DCBS fulfilled one of their RIAC obligations, which is to bring agency-specific data to the table, right? Let's say they brought, I don't know what kind of reports they may have, but out-of-home placement rate data report. They've got some new data and they're going to all excited about it and they're going to come share it at the RIAC. And so you could very well take that information that they just presented and structure a conversation for your RIAC using this method and move your RIAC to some kind of action based on that data that was just shared. Now, I know sometimes, and we do this at the RIAC level, somebody presents some very compelling data, and we have conversation about it. We don't always, I should say, structure the conversation that follows in this way. And then we leave without any action that anybody's going to take on what was just presented. We sometimes will get people's emotional reactions. Sometimes people will ask for clarification about the objective facts, if you will, that were presented. I feel like we sometimes sort of skip over the interpretive level because that's a hard one, that's complex. Sometimes we jump right to the action, the now what, without processing the meaning behind what you just heard about the DCBS data or whatever it is. And so you kind of get out of sequence and you don't follow that very important neurological journey that people need to go through in their brain to get to appropriate and effective action. And so, so I hope that helps a little bit with understanding the sequencing of the questioning process that will help, again, move people from, I just gave you a bunch of information about something, and to what action, if any, do we need to take on that information. So we're going to switch gears just a little bit. And I'm going to go into a little more detail about each of these, but I just want to do a quick check-in. Do people need a little bit of a break? Because how long have we been going? About an hour? Yeah, so we've been going for an hour. Do we want to take about a 3-minute? Can we do a 3-minute break? Get water, bio break if you need it. Okay, well, we'll do that. All right. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time because I've already gone through these different levels pretty much. But I do want to, just make sure you know that this kind of information is in the slide, again, about each of the levels of questioning or the types of questions. And there are here in this slide, it gives you some sample questions that you can ask at this level. And then it also calls out some of the traps and pitfalls. And so one thing that I think I am guilty of is, asking closed-ended questions rather than more open-ended kinds of questions, which really will shut down a conversation quickly. And then it also on this slide will give you an indication of what happens if you jump right to, if you skip the objective level or the what level and jump right to one of the other types of questions, what that can sort of lead to in terms of the group's conversation. So you have material here related to the objective level, that reflective or, gut level, interpretive level, and then finally, the decisional level. And so again, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on those. So if we can scroll ahead to slide 20, I think it is. All right. So this is a quick set of sort of steps to follow for leading a focused conversation. And again, even if you're not the RIAC leader or the RIAC chair or the LRC, and you're a RIAC member who doesn't necessarily facilitate, you may at some point be presenting information and facilitating a conversation. So that's why I wanted to make sure all of you had access to this methodology. And so, and you can certainly use it outside of a RIAC setting too. I just want to make sure I say that. And so here are just a few things to think about in terms of leading a focused conversation. So obviously you're going to want to think about your setting. making sure that you're, and some of this won't apply to RIACs because you already have a setting, you already send out invitations. So this is if you're going to lead a conversation sort of from scratch or whatever. It's very important that you set the stage with some opening remarks to talk about why people are there and what the topic is, and giving them any context that's necessary so that people are ready for the conversation. And I am the world's worst for walking into a meeting, not reminding people of the purpose of the meeting, jumping right into a discussion, and expecting people to catch up cognitively. I've done it 100 million times. And so setting that context, giving people sort of a way to organize their brain before you start the conversation by using an opening is very important. And the template that I'm going to show you has a place for you to write out, if you need to, what your opening statement is going to be so that you can do that. You're also going to need to develop your questions, at each of those different levels. And those first questions, those questions at the objective level or the what question mark stage, what they recommend is that you have every participant answer that first question, because it kind of gets people warmed up. It kind of gives people some information about, how comfortable they're going to be speaking out and all of this kind of stuff. And so it just kind of acts as an icebreaker. It also is important that you sort of set the stage for people to, not be orators and talk forever. And then it also is important to make sure that everybody here is able to hear everybody else. And I don't think they just mean physically hear. I think they mean, that everybody's voice is being heard in the room. And then you're also going to create those subsequent questions for the other stages or the other types of questions, if you will. And it's important at that point, you kind of move away from that, let me hear from everybody at that first stage to, you address it to the group, and then you have just sort of a popcorn approach to people giving you input. So it changes up at the recommendation of the developers of this methodology. They suggest having everybody answer the first objective questions, but then kind of opening it up and giving people the choice to answer subsequent questions. There are a few other steps here that I'm not going to get into just because of time, but I do hope that you'll go back and, sort of read over these if you do choose to use this methodology at some point. So that how, what to do if the topic sort of starts going somewhere else, or if you have a heated argument that happens, or if somebody keeps, interrupting people or whatever it might be, because goodness knows, I think we've all been in those meetings as well. And some of these are just good facilitation strategies, no matter what kind of conversation you're trying to facilitate. And then very important too, to have a closing and to sum up the group's conclusions, because remember, this is about bringing your group to some kind of action, right? That's the ultimate sort of end game for this. And so it's important, I think, that before you sort of leave that conversation, that focused conversation, that you sum up the group's conclusions, and that you make sure people know what's going to happen with the notes. Are all these actions that the RIAC has come up with going to be translated to the action plan in some way? Who's going to do that? Those kinds of things. So some kind of closure, so that you don't just sort of have the conversation and then, nobody knows what's going to happen after that. All right, next slide. The next couple of slides are considerations or things that are important to keep in mind as you're facilitating a focused conversation. And one of that is that you have to trust the wisdom of the group. And, sometimes I haven't always been very good at that. Like I walk in thinking, great, I don't know what's going to come out of this, or, I feel, or sometimes I've been guilty of walking into a meeting and presenting some information and thinking that I already know what needs to happen action wise, and that I don't really need to rely on the wisdom of the group. But there is something incredibly powerful about having a collective of people together around a specific topic or issue or piece of information or whatever it is that you are conversing about, and leading them through a conversation as a collective. And so it's really important. I think that particular piece is to just trust the wisdom of the group. And so if we can go to the next slide. I think too, another one that's important is checking the validity of the data from time to time when you're having some conversations, because I think we assume statements are valid, and that, but sometimes we may have to fact check things, right? You may have to, now you're not going to fact check somebody's emotional response to something, but you may fact check the validity of other kinds of information that people are sharing, especially if it's going to have strong implications for your actions or any actions that you're taking. So if, you're discussing a new policy that, someone has put out there, or some data that somebody has put out there, and you're just not, the group's maybe not quite sure it's valid, be sure to check the validity of that. And then on the next slide, you'll see some additional considerations related to group ownership of the issue and content, that it really has to be the collective group that is owning whatever it is you're talking about, that it's not necessarily the facilitator's thing that they're putting out there and nobody else feels a sense of ownership around it. Now, one of the things that I'll mention in a little bit that I think is incredibly important is to remember, and I don't know, for those of you that didn't listen to my, or were not able to listen to the previous presentation I did on the 5-stage process for data-based conversations, I talked about making sure you had actionable challenges that you were choosing, or actionable areas of focus, right? Things you actually have purview over or have some ability to influence. And I gave you some examples in that last presentation of that. So I think making sure that that is the case when you're having these conversations is important as well. So the next few slides are how to prepare for this conversation as a facilitator. And so I'm actually, in the interest of time, I just put these in here so you would have them, but I'm going to ask that we skip forward to slide 27 if we can, because this is a conversation preparation format. This is something that you, as the facilitator of this conversation, whether you be the RIAC chair or a member who's bringing something to the RIAC, can use to sort of help you structure the conversation and be ready. It's kind of your cheat sheet, if you will. And so it starts with something called the rational objective, and that's kind of wordy and doesn't really tell you much when you first just read it. But it's the practical goal. I wish they would have just said that, but I'm using their format here, the people that developed this, but it's the rational or the practical goal of the conversation. And so, and I'll give you some examples in a minute, but it's it might be to clarify a misunderstanding. You might have a very practical goal of solving a specific problem. That sounds like what Donnie Ray's last conversation was like, hey guys, we got this problem. We need to come up with a solution. That's your rational objective. I would say your practical goal of the conversation. Maybe you want to, we often talk about what were the lessons learned from something we did last year, like what we learned from last year's System of Care Academy. I don't know. That may be your rational objective for the conversation, or your, as I prefer again, practical goal of the conversation. So you would list that there, and you would share that with the group and say, this is why we're here, right? We want to accomplish this very practical goal as a result of talking together today. And then there's an experiential aim, which is what kind of an inner impact do you want the conversation to have? So it might be that you're really trying to promote your RIAC's confidence about a project. So the conversation is really intended to have that experiential aim. So again, what do you want people to experience as a result? That's that internal piece. Maybe it's to promote their confidence. Maybe it's to promote relationships. There could be a lot of different experiential aims, but what is the particular experiential aim that you want to see happen from this conversation? Because you have to keep both of those things in mind as you're facilitating, as you're designing your questions, right? And then this is where you would put your opening statement. Remember, I said it's very important to give them some context. And so what is that opening statement that you need to make? And again, I'll show you an example of one in a moment. And then here's where you would come up with those questions, the what questions, the gut questions, the so what, and the now what questions. And again, the reason that you design these questions is so that you're taking your group through this systematic neurological journey, right? Of thinking through whatever the issue is that you're talking about, or the data or information that you've just shared with them, taking them through in a systematic way toward action. And then again, I emphasize the importance of having a strong closing statement so that people know, you can summarize for them, what did we just talk about? What did we just have a conversation about, and where did we land with things, and what's going to happen now? And so again, closing that conversation so that everybody knows what's going to happen. So let's do a really simple one. If we can go to the next one, we're just going to do, I'm going to give you an example, thank you, of a conversation format for the following situation. So the RIAC has been, let's assume, working together all day to develop your action plan. And at the end of the day, and I know I saw Dee Dee Ward on here, she does this sometimes with our System of Care 5 group. At the end of that very long, productive, hopefully day, when you've been working on your action plan, you're going to have a focused conversation to reflect on what has happened. And so you could have this could be as short as 2 minutes, or you could have this go on for 25 minutes. I don't recommend that, but you could. But it's a way to reflect on how your day has been, right? And so your practical goal from this conversation, let's say it's a 5-minute conversation, is to develop a shared understanding of what happened during the day. And your experiential aim is really that you want people to have some kind of a celebration of what they've accomplished, to feel good about the productivity of the day. And so your opening can be as simple as this. So now that we finished our day here together around RIAC action planning, let's take a few minutes to reflect on our work together today. And so here are some sample objective questions that you could walk your group through. So you may say, so Kelly Dorman, what words are still ringing in your ears right now based on what we did together today? And Kelly's word, might be, gosh, I feel energized now that we've, done some action planning together. And then remember, with objective questions, you get everybody to say something, right? So everybody would go around and say, here's what's still ringing in my ear, or here's the whatever, however you want to phrase it. You can ask the question however you want. And then you would move the group to the gut piece, and you would say, all right, so what was the high point for you today? And folks would say, hey, we came up with 5 activities that our RIAC is going to do this year, or we finally settled on an area of focus that we all agree upon, or whatever, whatever the high point was. And then you ask them about their low points. You design these questions. You design these questions as the facilitator. So there are no right or wrong questions here. They do need to be reflective in nature, right? They do need to get at that emotional gut response to the experience that you're talking about, but they don't have to, there's not a specific set of questions that you have to ask. And then you're going to move them to the interpretive piece. So what about this experience we had together today? What did we learn? What is the key insight from the day? So these are just a couple, again, sample questions that move them from, objective to gut and emotional to, so what does this all mean for us? How do we make sense of this? And then finally, you might say, what unfinished business do we need to pick up on at the next meeting? And so that would be where some of your action steps would come out. Okay. And then you would say, simple closing. That was a wonderful way to celebrate the day and to bring our time together to a close. Thank you for sharing some of your time to go through this, reflective conversation at the end to kind of put some closure on things. And so, this is a very simple preparatory format that you can use. If you can just pull this blank one right off the PowerPoint slide. If it's PDF, and you can't get it off there, let us know and we'll un-PDF it and send you the template. But you can just literally jot down your ideas before you go into the meeting, come up with your questions, do all this in advance, obviously, and have your conversation ready and give it a shot. I hope all of you will give it a shot and try it. So we have, do we go until noon? I forget, or are we done? Are we done?
We usually end at 11:30.
Shoot, I had 12 in my head. I am so sorry. I know we talked about that earlier. So we didn't get to the kids count. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to charge you all with taking this back to your RIACs. And what I would like for you to do is to take your county level profile out of the book and present that to your group, or have somebody present it. And then I would like for you to take this conversation format here, because this is what we were going to actually try to do together. Take this conversation format and go through just a focused conversation about the findings for your county. And if you want, you could hone in on just one domain. You could hone in on just the education findings. So here, let me give you a peek of the dashboard. So here's the education dashboard that was in there for the whole state. So yours for a county would probably look something like this. But you could pop that up, have people take a look at the data, talk about it just a little bit, and then boom, go back to this conversation preparation format and share with them the rational objective, the experiential aim, give them this opening. And of course you can change this as much as you want, and then walk them through the questions. Yeah.
Do you want me to scroll over to that particular slide?
Oh, sorry, I scrolled. Sorry, I scrolled and forgot to tell you to scroll. I'm so sorry. I have mine operating over here. And so you could pop back over to this conversational preparation format. If you can go back to that format there.
Okay.
Yep, that. You could pop back over and have the conversation about about the data. So it could be the education data. You could choose to have somebody present on each one of them individually and talk about each one individually. But ultimately, you'll notice over here in the final column where the decisional is, I mentioned what is an actionable challenge that the RIAC can take based on the information that came out of the kids count data sheet, right? So what is that actionable challenge? And I just want to remind you, that when we say actionable, we mean that it has factors behind it that the RIAC can actually address or influence directly. And so you really want to make sure that when you're getting folks to think about this data, that you're focusing on things that the RIAC itself can actually take some action on. And so I apologize, folks, I have not done this presentation before. And so I did not time it out, but I'll just leave you, if you'll go scroll down to the quote from Kennedy, which is the same quote I used after the last one, because I still think it's true, that there are risks and costs to action, but they are far less than the long-range risks of comfortable inaction. And I know that you all as RIACs are all about taking some action. And I truly hope that this focused conversation methodology and the tool, the template and the information that I've given you will be helpful so that you can move toward greater action as you investigate different data reports and other types of information that comes your way. So appreciate all of you, and I will be here. If anybody has questions, just email me. I've got my information on the next slide, I believe. So when you get the slide deck, you'll be able to reach me, but Vanessa also knows how to reach me. So appreciate everybody's attention today. Sorry I kept you over.
Yeah. Tina, I just want to thank you for presenting on this topic. I think it's the information that was provided today, I think will be wonderful for RIACs to take back and begin not just playing around with it, but incorporating it into their meetings and their discussions. So before Tina jumps off, does anybody have any questions for Tina?